From the European Parliament in Brussels, this is Raw Politics. Thanks for joining us. Here's what's coming up. Final offer. UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson unveils his Brexit alternative to the EU. Tractor power. Dutch farmers say they're being villainized in the fight against climate change. 1 year later, did Jamal Khashoggi's murder really change Europe's relationship with Saudi Arabia? Political drama. We sit down with the Greek celebrity turned politician Alexis Yorgoulis. And budding bromance. Ukraine's Volodymyr Zelensky meets Tom Cruise in tonight's Raw Moment. All right, it is time to meet our panelists this evening. We have Darren McCaffrey, our political editor here at Euronews. Darren, what are you watching tonight?
Well, 1 year on from that murder, the tapes have been released from inside the Saudi Arabian embassy in Turkey, where Khashoggi was murdered. Absolutely heinous crime. But the question is, well, there are so many questions still to answer, so many people still to be held accountable for. And you're right, has it actually changed the dial on relationships with Saudi Arabia? At the moment, not
exactly.
at all.
Key question, has anything changed? All right, joining us as well, Heidi Hautala. She's a Finnish MEP from the Greens EFA group and Vice Chair of the European Parliament. Heidi, what about you? What story are you watching?
Oh, I feel very sympathetic to the farmers, and because I think there's a way out of this agony, because I think we can change our food production together with them.
Okay, all right. And also joining us in the studio, we have Gunnar Beck. He is a German MEP from the Identity and Democracy Group. What about you, Gunnar?
Brexit. It's been Brexit for a long time.
And still always a Brexit. All right, that is exactly where we are beginning this evening. Take it or leave it. That is the message from the UK Prime Minister to Brussels. Boris Johnson presented his first and final Brexit plan to EU leaders with just 10 days to reach a deal. Well, Mr. Johnson greeted his colleagues in the audience before taking centre stage for his first speech as party leader at the UK Tory conference. He vowed to get Brexit done, urging Brussels to compromise over his, quote, reasonable proposals. Mr. Johnson says that crashing out would be the only alternative, despite a recently passed law that would require him to request another extension if MPs don't back a new deal by October the 19th. All right, well, that speech happened in Manchester, in the north of England, and our correspondent Vincent McAviney is there now and is joining us from there. Okay, Vincent, first of all, what is the atmosphere like in the room, you know, when Boris Johnson gave that speech? And obviously, he was trying to get a message across, you know, to both to his MPs and to Brussels. So you can tell us everything that happened.
Good evening, Tessa. Well, there were two audiences for this speech. There was the European Union awaiting his Brexit plans, which have just dropped, that I'll speak about in a minute. But there was also the audience here in the conference hall, the party faithful who turned up. They have watched Boris Johnson come to this conference for years now. He's always swept in, stolen the thunder from David Cameron and Theresa May and made it all about himself. And now they finally have the man that they wanted as their leader. And so he was trying to get this party ready for a general election that they thought they might be in now, but that they will likely be in a matter of weeks or months. And so he was trying to send them away from here as happy warriors, ready to go on the doorstep to fight for the Conservative Party. There was lots of applause for the speech in the conference hall. Many people, though, criticising outside, saying it was pretty policy light and was the kind of usual after-dinner speech that Boris Johnson likes making. Lots of bombast, some jokes, but nothing really heavyweight to it. Let's have a little listen, though, to what the Prime Minister had to say.
And today in Brussels, we are tabling what I believe are constructive and reasonable proposals, which provide a compromise for both sides. Yes, this is a compromise by the UK, and I hope very much that our friends understand that and compromise in their turn. Because if we fail to get an agreement because of what is essentially a technical discussion on the exact nature of future customs checks, when that technology is improving the whole time, then let us be in no doubt conference of what the alternative is. The alternative is no deal. And that is not an outcome we want. It is not an outcome we seek at all. But let me tell you, my friends, it is an outcome for which we are ready.
Now, Tessa, literally, as I was coming on air to speak to you now about this, the 4-page letter that the Prime Minister Boris Johnson has sent to Jean-Claude Juncker has been published. In it, he says that the UK government officially now is dropping the backstop. It says that it wants to abide by the Good Friday peace agreement. It confirms that they want to work with the Irish government and with the European Union to create as little friction as possible on the island of Ireland. But it does put forward that they want to have some kind of new arrangement. Now, there was talk in the week about some centres, either 5 or 10 miles or so from the border, where you'd have these customs checks. Just on a very quick scan of this, because I literally just got it and it's about 4 pages long, these centres aren't mentioned. It talks about having these checks being done in the manufacturing sites themselves, to not have any stops at the border where this is checked, to have it all done via sort of good faith and having it by electronic document filing. Now, the EU will be looking at this and wondering whether or not this is doable or not. But the Prime Minister, as we heard in the conference hall here in Manchester, thinks that the UK, by creating what they've sort of briefed out as having 2 borders, one in the Irish Sea, one between the Republic and Northern Ireland for 4 years up to 2025 after this transition period, that is a compromise that they will make, so that the EU, they hope, will compromise and get a deal done. The Prime Minister talks about the importance of getting this all sorted by the October 31st deadline. He says he's put these proposals now so that they can be confirmed at that October 14th Council meeting. But there are some who will be wondering, is any of this really doable? And is the Prime Minister just using this as a bluff so that he can say to the British people, well, I put forward a proposal, I did everything possible, we now have to leave with no deal if this isn't accepted?
Okay, thank you for that, correspondent there, Vincent McAviney. I mean, so this is the big announcement that we were expecting from Boris Johnson, the new offer on the table. Darren, just very quickly to add to what Vinny was saying there. Okay, is this something new that is different again when it comes to the backstop that could probably change something here?
Well, when you listen to what has been said in Dublin and indeed in Brussels, the simple answer to that is no, in the sense that it doesn't get around what the backstop was there to provide, which was to keep the borders free and frictionless as it is, a recognition that there will be 2 customs territories on the island of Ireland, which means that there will have to be checks.
The fact that it's not near a land border does not really change anything.
In part it doesn't, because the whole point is that those checks will have to take place. Now, the UK government have continually suggested that there are technological ways to find and to solve that. And the problem is, people will point out, the technology is not there yet. It may well be in the future, but it's not there yet. But this is not just an argument. People in Dublin, Brussels, and indeed it must be said in Northern Ireland too, it's not an argument simply about trying to find a technological way around the border. It's also about addressing the concerns of identity, about what that border means to people in Ireland, and people would say that falls short. And just in terms of the letter, I mean, this letter says that it sets out a reasonable compromise, as Boris Johnson says, the broad landing zone in which I believe a deal can begin to take shape. Can begin to take shape. The EU Council Summit is in just 2 weeks' time.
Absolutely.
I mean, we haven't got time. This idea that it can take shape and a deal can be done in that short space of time, people in Brussels say that's very unlikely.
I mean, I think, Heidi, from this side, people are looking at what Boris Johnson has just presented and are thinking, what is his real motivation here? Is he serious about getting a deal, or is this a distraction and designed to fail, as some had pointed out?
I tend to see it as a kind of a cover-up operation, and it's like the biggest show he has done so far to justify that. Deep down inside, I'm afraid he really wants a no-deal Brexit on the 31st of October, latest maybe by the end of the year with a small extension. So I think it's just a self-deception, and his obsession about the sovereignty of the Britain, UK, I think it's so deep you cannot cure it. But in the world today, you need transnational cooperation, and he should overcome this identity problem that he has.
So so you think this is the words you used, cover-up. Gunnar, do you agree with this?
Well, there have been quite a few things here. Cover-up or self-deception, these are 2 different things. I'm not sure it's either. But where I tend to agree is that it's unlikely to be a solution. I rather doubt this proposal will be acceptable to the EU. I think it still contains a number of problems, just as much as the current or the May deal is unacceptable to the UK. And then there's the additional question of whether this proposal, were it acceptable to the EU, will in fact be acceptable to the British Parliament. That's not clear.
That's another part of the story.
And then I think there is one additional point. What then? I think it's important to realise, and I'm sure that's not always altogether clearly portrayed in the media, I mean, what would happen if there's no new agreement? I think then the legal situation within Britain is that it'd be very, very difficult for the Prime Minister to leave on the 31st.
Okay, you know, another point I'd like to bring up is, you know, talk here is about the EU's willingness to give a concession. Do you think that this idea of a time limit on the backstop is something that the EU might take out of their back pocket? And okay, Heidi,
I mean,
you
I have to say no, but
go ahead.
No, I think this idea that technology will solve the issue, if not now, then in some years' time, there's no guarantees that this happens. And I think technological experts are very doubtful about that. And this new idea of customs check at manufacturing sites just off the borders is a bit weird.
What about time limiting the backstop?
no, because I think Dublin have already ruled it out. And
So
if
it's
anything,
out of the question.
well,
Right.
if anything, I think the one thing that many other European nations, while they may not be that interested in Brexit or indeed even in the Irish border, you know, if you were Lithuania, Estonia, Slovenia, a smaller European nation, the whole point of the European project is that there is solidarity when you find yourself in a situation like this. But, I mean, just to add to this, I think what the EU will do, and, you know, President Juncker is speaking to Boris Johnson this afternoon, is that they will engage with this because ultimately...
They will take it seriously then.
Well, there's a PR exercise to do here as well. No one wants to be blamed for the potential of no deal, even if that remains unlikely at this stage. So they will engage, at least on a certain level. But I think this idea that, from what we've seen so far, that this is somehow going to be the start of a compromise that can be achieved in the next couple of weeks is simply not going to work.
It's still far. That's still far.
And the big thing to add to this, even if they could agree on a deal, even if the EU did move quite significantly, can they guarantee that Boris Johnson, who has got no majority in the UK Parliament, could deliver it?
Right. OK, very quick point from you, Gunnar, before we move on.
Well, I think I agree with much of what's been said here. I doubt there'd be a no-deal Brexit on the 31st of October. I think reservations are well-founded insofar as the acceptability of the British proposals to the EU are concerned. And I think similar reservations are equally appropriate in relation to the possible ratification of a deal by the British Parliament. The other question is, who is to blame for this? The one point where I disagree with both my interlocutors here is that I don't think it's the British government who's to blame for the British...
You don't think so?
No, because I think right at the start of the negotiations, the British government at that time under Theresa May submitted to the three
I think we'll
initial
find a lot
demands.
will disagree at this Parliament on where the blame where the blame lies. All right.
Well, I think Britain initially agreed to the EU's three initial demands, and there's been absolutely no concession by the EU in return.
It must be said that Theresa May's chief of staff said that that was the biggest mistake at the very start, was agreeing to the EU's schedule rather than...
Well, there you go.
Britain's.
OK, well, you know, Boris Johnson's Brexit plan is followed very closely here on the continent, as evidenced by our discussion. Well, German Chancellor Angela Merkel was speaking about the global economic slowdown, and she was quick to point the blame at Brexit. Well, let's take a look.
Zweitens haben wir hier gar keinen Grund, in irgendeiner Weise hochmütig zu sitzen, denn wir verhandeln seit 3 Jahren mit Großbritannien über einen Austritt Großbritanniens, der geregelt ist, und der bringt für uns auch eine große Unsicherheit, wenn ich nur mal daran denke, dass dieser Austritt am 31. Oktober stattfinden soll. Und viele Arbeitnehmer heute noch nicht genau wissen, wie die Wertschöpfungskette in Zukunft aussieht. Dann ist das natürlich auch ein erhebliches Unsicherheitspotenzial, denn Großbritannien ist ja nicht ein kleines europäisches Land, sondern ein großer weltweiter Player. Und insofern sage ich mal, ein jeder kehre vor seiner Tür, und dann wird die Welt eine bessere sein.
All right, just very quickly, Gunnar, does Ms. Merkel have a point?
I don't know what her point was. It was altogether unclear to me.
Brexit is partly to blame for the economic slowdown.
Well, I think to blame Brexit for a worldwide economic slowdown...
Partly.
Well, yes, in very small parts, really. I mean, Mrs. Merkel is a physicist. She's not an economist. And to blame Brexit for a worldwide slowdown is verging on the grotesque, really.
And I agree with that.
You agree with it?
No, I agree, because ultimately, you know, the Brexit uncertainty has not slowed down the French economy, for example, as much. And ultimately, Angela Merkel has to take some form of responsibility that her economy, which is exposed to the global economy because they're exporters, in part, she has failed to build a relationship with Donald Trump, which in his trade war has helped slow the global economy.
So the blame is more in Germany's court, you're saying?
Okay. The blame for it as well.
But let's face it that this is a very dangerous moment for the world economy. So any upheaval, for instance, in the form of Brexit, is not going to help, but on the contrary. But I mean, I'm horrified about the idea that all politicians and big leaders should be economists. I'm sorry.
I'm not saying that. But I'm not saying that.
Lawyers like you.
No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying that this is outside Mrs. Merkel's field of expertise, and I very much agree with your political commentator here. I think Germany's problems are largely self-inflicted.
We should probably have another panel on that specific question, whether we need economists to discuss economics. All right, now to move on to another story that we are watching closely. Hong Kong is recovering from one of its most violent days, according to the city's police chief. Now, protesters clashed with authorities yesterday on the 70th anniversary of the Communist Party rule in China. And today, hundreds of students in Hong Kong staged a series of sit-ins in support of a teenager who was shot by police. It was the first time that live ammunition was used on protesters since demonstrations against a proposed extradition bill began 4 months ago. Protests have since expanded into demands for greater democracy. Okay. Let's go now to the scene in Hong Kong, where we have Tom Grundy standing by for us there, an editor-in-chief of the Hong Kong Free Press. So, Tom, you were there yesterday for us as well, describing what happened. It was a pretty tense day, and today the sit-ins continue. Can you tell us what is going on?
Well, certainly I'm at the Tsim Sha Tsui police station now, which was the site of some of the fiercest battles over the last 17 weeks even. This has been a flashpoint on Nathan Road. Police have said today that they released a record number of tear gas canisters, 1,400 canisters, 1,300 rubber bullets and sponge grenades, and made 269 arrests. All of these were the most we have seen in any day. They also fired 6 live rounds, including one into the chest of an 18-year-old, which has caused much controversy today. I can just show you more of Nathan Road here, which if anyone has visited Hong Kong, you will recognize this as the main tourist thoroughfare. And you can see as we look down the street, some of the barricades have been removed by protesters just over there to form the makeshift barricades to try and block police. Although a lot of the anti-government graffiti has been cleaned up around here, it's a lot quieter than usual. This is Golden Week. Normally, we would see this heaving with particularly mainland tourists, but things have taken a downturn, obviously, with tourism and the economy. And today, we barely got to lunchtime without there being wildcat protests over on Hong Kong Island. And I've just heard that in the last hour or so up in the north of Hong Kong, there has been tear gas and more road occupations and wildcat protests.
Yeah, I do recognize that street very well, Tom. And, you know, the reaction to the use of live fire, which was the first time they did yesterday, is the reason also why we're seeing some of the sit-ins. But now that the protesters said, you know, they will still continue, how is this going to play out? And how has Beijing reacted so far to the most violent day they've seen so far?
Well, Beijing has called on other countries to call out these protests and stop siding with black mobs, as they put it. But state media, the local police, the local government, civil service, they've all been putting out press releases and saying that the shooting yesterday was legal and appropriate. This is a leaderless movement. We don't know what's going to happen next. And a lot of the protests, certainly tonight, are completely wildcat and unexpected. But we did have a citizens' press conference earlier today, and they said, we are now in a state of war. So this has definitely been an escalation in the last 24 hours. And I think a lot of Hong Kongers were maybe hoping that things might settle down now. But I think we might be in store for the opposite happening.
Right, thanks for that, Tom Grundy there in Hong Kong. I mean, this it's very difficult to know which way this is really going to go, and that escalation, that use of live fire yesterday, did escalate the situation. How much more do you think the EU should be doing in this? We're touching on the EU's role, you know, the reaction to what's happening in Hong Kong.
I think it's very important to condemn this.
Beyond what has already been said.
I think what we could do is to invite defenders of their rights to come to the European Parliament to give us documents and record of what is actually happening. I think the EU has to stay firm that these people are protesting by far most non-violently. It's a big non-violent
When China
expression.
says the use of that live fire was I forget the word that was used, but they, you know, they defended the use of the
No,
justified.
I think it's completely wrong. And we have to understand, of course, that Hong Kong is under big pressure between China, celebrating 70th anniversary of the People's Republic just at this very moment, and the attempt to keep its own system. And I think the EU has to stand firm.
All right,
my point is, well, stand firm and do what, though? I mean, what can the EU actually do? You can collect documents, listen to people all the time. It's going to change the reality on the ground. And the whole point is, I mean, what can the EU do to actually influence China's policy in Hong Kong? Literally nothing.
Not much.
I think one thing is that, the EU should be much more firm on condemning massive human rights violations in China. That's why one of the Sakharov Prize candidates for the European Parliament is Professor Ilham Tohti, who is an Uyghur, who is representing the 1 million people in concentration camps. And the EU has been much too timid, but the European Parliament will have to be more
So far, the
rigid.
reaction has been, you know, the EU has called for de-escalation in what's going on in Hong Kong, and as you know, has been pointed out, what else can the EU do? Well, coming up on Raw Politics, fighting back, why Dutch farmers say they're being targeted in the fight against climate change. Plus, Tom Cruise strikes up a bromance with the Ukrainian leader Volodymyr Zelensky. That's in tonight's Raw Moment. Welcome back. Dutch farmers took to the roads yesterday to demand more respect for their industry. Thousands of farmers traveled to The Hague for the protest, causing major disruption on the nation's roads as they feel they are being blamed for nitrogen emissions that pollute the environment. It comes as some politicians suggested the country should reduce the number of livestock allowed to reduce emissions. Well, the agriculture minister rejected that idea while speaking at the demonstration. And joining me now is one of the farmers who was at the protest yesterday, Mr. Roy Mayer. Thank you for being with us tonight. So can you just tell us what exactly are your demands?
Well, our demands are going about respect for our needs for how we produce food, and we want some respect from the public, but also from politicians. You know, we work hard every day and night, and there were several events in the past time which made us believe that we had to demonstrate. I mean, we feel like the scapegoats of the public debate and the media, especially coming from a small minority of our society. You know, occupations of piggeries in Boxtel, and then the statement of Tjeerd de Groot, where he wants to reduce the just livestock by half. It was just the straw that broke the camel's back. That's why we want to demonstrate.
Okay, do you acknowledge the contribution of your industry, though, to the debate you were talking about? It's the climate change debate.
Well, it's not a matter of not acknowledging. It's a matter of how we receive a message. We have done so much since 1990 on ammonia emissions. You know, 2/3 of the Dutch agriculture ammonia emissions are reduced. Our company only 3 years ago invested more than 100,000 euros in reducing the ammonia emissions. We feel like it's just never enough. Thereby, we find it as farmers hard to understand that different member states of the European Union have different legislation about the same European law. Like Germany has threshold values. In the Netherlands, that's not a thing which we can use in our legislation about the ammonia emissions.
Okay, so if just finally, and if farmers, you say, are being scapegoated, then who exactly should be blamed?
It's especially the debate in the media and respect where politicians talk about us and about our sector. And we should invest with the government in an open dialogue between farmers and consumers to give them more knowledge about how we produce our super standard quality food for them. You know, it's important that they understand that it's not a good thing that South American beef, which has lower quality standards, lies in a supermarket instead of our own beef. That is the thing which we are looking for.
Okay, thank you very much for talking to us there, Mr. Roy Mayer, a farmer there from the Netherlands who was at the protest. Well, in the studio to talk to us about this is Dirk-Jan Epping, a Dutch MEP with the European Conservatives and Reformist Group. And still with us, Heidi Hautala, Finnish MEP with the Greens EFA, and also Darren McCaffrey is still here. But Dirk-Jan, you were also at the protest.
Yes, I was there.
And hearing what Roy had to say, do they have a point?
Oh, I fully agree.
Okay.
The demonstration was very impressive. The Dutch agricultural sector is very strong. In volume is the second in the world in terms of exporting products after the United States. It's very efficient, very productive, and it has to be sustainable because it's a small country. And that's what they are doing. And this is totally disrespected by climate activists. And sometimes these people are attacked. So they felt criminalized, and they wanted to show the population that they are doing an honest job, and that's true, and the population is supporting them.
So where is this coming from? I mean, there's this issue of they were saying that they're portrayed as animal torturers and polluters. Where's that coming from? Is there what's behind that?
I think the sector has been in difficulties for many, many years, so it's understandable that they feel targeted. But I think this idea that we heard from Roy about an open dialogue between producers and consumers is the one that we should really take on, because consumers, including myself, we have new ideas about what we would like to eat in order to keep ourselves healthy and the planet and climate in order. So, for instance, in Finland, many farmers are now doing what they call carbon agriculture. They find new innovative ways to sequestrate carbon from the air to the soil. As an agronomist, I know how important living soil is, and we should go more for organic ways of farming, which produces maybe a little bit less,
but is he right?
Better.
Is he right, though, that the whole industry is being scapegoated and others are not being asked to?
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure that's right. I must be said that I think nitrous oxide, which actually contributes more towards global warming than carbon dioxide, but has fallen quite significantly in the Netherlands since the 1990s, unlike carbon dioxide, which has remained at the same level. And it must also be added that actually where carbon emissions or greenhouse gases are at the highest in the Netherlands is around Schiphol Airport. Not a coincidence where the airline industry is pretty strong. In saying that, does everyone and should everyone want to contribute to lowering levels of emissions? Yes, they do. Are farmers part of that solution? Yes, they are. Should they cause the worst traffic jam in Dutch history? I'm not entirely sure that's the way to go about it. But it didn't work to a degree because it's on the news.
The people were applauding on the bridges. They stood there like this. They fully support the farmers because they know these people are the backbone of the countryside. And I have the impression there is also a campaign in the government against the countryside. They are not the deplorables of the Netherlands. They are the heroes we have.
But there is this one fact globally that 18% of agricultural land is used to produce 83% is used for producing animal foods and fodder. And I think globally we have to go for more vegetarian style of diets. And you don't, not that everybody has to do it 100%. I started with 97%.
Farmers wouldn't be happy with that either.
Yeah, and what you were saying, what was interesting is that they were being applauded on the streets, in fact. And I mean, this is also what far-right leader Geert Wilders had implied, because he had made an appearance at the protest as well. And let's listen to what he had to say.
Jullie zijn de helden van Nederland. Waar zou Nederland zijn zonder onze boeren? Jullie zorgen voor ons voedsel. Jullie zorgen voor ons eten, voor ons vlees. Jullie zorgen voor alles. En wat Nederland, wat jullie, onze boeren verdienen, is geen gedoe, maar is ons respect.
Well, Geert Wilders there was saying very similarly to what you were saying. They're the heroes of the country. But is this, this is taking an issue, politicizing it. This is certainly the topic that gets the working class and people riled up and supportive of politicians like that.
Because these people are generally very loyal to authority. So for them to demonstrate is not something they do every day. The last time was 40 years ago. But it's until here now. So they want to express their feelings and they demand respect, not from the population, because the population respects, not from the government. And it's particularly the government, and it's also supported by Greens, that become a sort of fanatical in terms of climate policies. To the extent
are we going to see something
unrealistic.
I really
They're trying
on
to
this.
kill the agricultural sector.
No, come on. I think what we Greens in the European Parliament called for is that we need to look again at the common agricultural policy, because there are these reports which are undisputed that land use has a very severe impact on climate change, and I wish that farmers would be welcome to participate in efforts to keep change the subsidies. But can I say one thing? The agribusiness lobby is not really participating to this change, and that is the problem for me. We need to have a common effort to do that.
It is interesting, clearly, when it comes to right-wing politics, there is this, obviously, cosmopolitan-rural divide, particularly when it comes to this issue of the environment. But be in no doubt, this is kind of the catch-22 situation for farmers, which is that they are going to have to try and potentially contribute towards lowering emissions.
That's what they're doing.
And because ultimately, with climate change, the land that they use to grow crops and grow animals could become unusable, particularly in somewhere like the Netherlands with rising seawaters. But are they heroes? Well, they certainly are very well subsidised European heroes.
And we need to change the other side of it.
European money they receive from us taxpayers.
Well, so without farmers, no food. And it's a very important lesson to know.
With
also
farmers,
in Finland,
better food.
Yeah, you have a lot of forests. We have a lot of cows.
Two ways of looking at it.
Well, we also have to take care of our carbon
and tractors.
You have nuclear power, nuclear energy. That's very good.
Okay, let's leave it at that. Because coming up on Raw Politics, the MEP with star power. We talk to Greek actor Alexis Yorgoulis as part of our special In Profile series. That's after the break. Welcome back to Raw Politics. Now, Alexis Yorgoulis may be more accustomed to reading lines and delivering speeches at the European Parliament, but this actor turned politician is determined to leave his mark. Well, I sat down with him this week in Brussels. Let's take a look. Alexis Yorgoulis. He's not your average MEP.
He's a nice guy. Go talk to him.
Yeah, he's quiet, but I call it mysterious.
Branded the George Clooney of Greece, Yorgoulis has starred on the big screen and the small.
I am Spiridon, meaning a basket for carrying seeds.
On his way to becoming a household name in the UK, Yorgoulis played a leading love interest in the hit ITV drama The Durrells. But now, swapping scripts for speeches, Alexis Yorgoulis represents the left-wing Syriza party in the European Parliament, hoping to use his position there to promote Greek art and cinema. But his fans shouldn't despair. This actor-turned-politician isn't planning to hang up his costumes anytime soon.
But nothing can put you in the shade.
Hi there, Alexis.
Hello,
so
how
good
are
to
you?
see you.
Nice meeting
So this
you.
is a nice Greek cafe. So
Yeah, this is one of the big spots in Brussels.
All right.
Let's go.
Welcome to Brussels.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, you're a celebrity, we could say, in Greece. Do people recognize you on the streets here?
You mean in Brussels?
Yeah.
I think just the Greeks and some from UK as well.
Now you've made a complete career shift. Well, you didn't leave your acting job yet.
No, and I don't want to leave it because I think that acting is part of my life, and I think that every person has to have this experience, like a hobby in a way.
All right, so you are a first-time MEP.
Yeah, and first time in politics.
In politics. Why did you become a politician?
I realized there is a great empty space regarding culture and what we do about culture. is the mean that can pass the information between nations, between people. Everything can be connected through culture.
Are you worried that people will not take you seriously because you're an actor?
I think that people can take someone seriously if has to say something serious. And if this is understandable, then we'll make them think, and that is the goal. We had English in school. I studied English, but because I was dyslexic, and back in the days, dyslexia wasn't something that everybody knows and they know how to deal with it. I wasn't a very good student, so I couldn't remember and I couldn't, speak and understand English. And through this, that it was like a game, acting in a role, I started not to be afraid to speak, not to be afraid to say that I don't know, so I need to learn and I need to put some effort, some extra effort. And at the end, I speak the level that I speak now.
You're dyslexic then. I mean, at the European Parliament, there's a lot of things that you have to read. Is it difficult for you?
It's very difficult. It's quite heavy, but I think that I can deal with it. And this is one of my goals as well, to talk about dyslexia for my country as well, and help people that they have dyslexia and they are, the first steps, the first, let's say, in school, and not to be afraid, and create some tools to help them even more.
One of the problems the European Union has is trying to find a common solution to migration, where Greece is at the forefront. So did you come here with any new ideas? How do you solve the problem in your country that you're dealing with?
I think the problem is very complicated. It's not like just a solution that, okay, let's do this and everything is fixed. I think the problem is much bigger than to help people, come.
Because the situation in the camps now in Greece is quite terrible. Do you think that Greece is getting enough support from the European Union?
I think because the problem is really, really big, the support will be never enough. We need to help all the time, check all the time if the support is effective, and go day by day and see what we can do better.
And what about economically? What is the life like for your countrymen now after austerity measures have been imposed? And what is your message as a Greek politician coming to Brussels?
Yeah, I was very lucky because when I started to grow up as a member of the society, we had like the golden age in a way, that everything was very easy to create your job, to do everything that you wanted. It was easy. When the measurements and all this have happened, all this crisis, started, the turn was really like unbelievable. It was like having a war without enemy. It was really, really bad. Now we have done whatever it was possible to stand in our feet, and I think that we are quite optimistic that we can go further and overcome this problem, that it's not, done.
In your tenure, in your 5 years as an MEP, what do you want to be known as?
One thing that I had in my mind and I wanted to communicate here in the Parliament, it was try to create like a pan-European festival for ancient drama, not just the Greek drama, ancient drama that Europe has, and unite all us together.
Now, coming up on Raw Politics, the aftershocks of a brutal murder. 1 year after journalist Jamal Khashoggi was killed in Turkey, we ask what the EU has been doing. That's coming up next. Welcome back. It's been 1 year since dissident journalist Jamal Khashoggi was murdered in the Saudi consulate in Istanbul. His death prompted widespread calls for EU countries to cease arms trading with Saudi Arabia. Well, our team in the Cube has been tracking just that. Alex, tell us what you have.
Well, Tessa, 1 year ago, since that brutal murder that shocked the world, and on social media, I can bring you up the tweet from Jamal Khashoggi's fiancée. This is the image she tweeted, along with the caption, "1 year since we last met. In 1 year, your assassination changed the world's compass," she says. "May Allah shower you with his mercy, my love, Jamal, till we meet in heaven." Well, changing the world's compass is certainly what many people wanted to happen after this brutal killing. Let's remind ourselves of the CCTV pictures, the last pictures that we saw of Jamal Khashoggi, or some of the last believed to be of Jamal Khashoggi, entering the consulate. There's a slight pause there, but these were the scenes, the last time he was seen. Now, in the immediate aftermath, we heard from Saudi Arabia denials, contradictions, before eventually admitting that he was killed in the consulate. Now, in the immediate aftermath, we had this kind of a response from Germany, at the time tweeting Heiko Maas saying here, there must be an EU-wide response. 1 year on, what has happened? Well, I'll bring you up what the EU have tweeted today. There's a spokesperson for Federica Mogherini, of course, the leader spokesperson on foreign affairs, saying the EU condemns the killing. There must be an independent investigation. And that's about that, really. There has not been a joint EU clampdown on arms sales to Saudi Arabia. And then when you zoom in on particular EU countries, like the United Kingdom, Caroline Lucas of the Green Party there, saying 1 year on, we continue to sell weapons to the Saudis, which are used against civilians in Yemen. The Yemen conflict, again, rolling on. You'd be forgiven for jumping between news coverage in the immediate aftermath of Khashoggi's killing and now, without really seeing all that much change. Let's just bring you the broader picture, overall terms. Up here, these are the countries which have, for various reasons, taken action to pause, stop or suspend arms sales. In particular, Germany rolling out an extension now into 2020 on arms sales with the kingdom, contrasting with these four. Look at this. Spain, the UK, France and Italy. They are well and truly pushing ahead with arms sales, although there is domestic court action being brought in the UK, and there have been admissions from ministers there that maybe some rules have been broken. So has Jamal Khashoggi's death led to a change in the world compass? Well, it's certainly not been forgotten, despite the fact there hasn't perhaps been the widespread change that some might have liked to see. I spoke to Professor Scott Lucas. He's an international politics professor at Birmingham University. I asked him, where in the world is Jamal Khashoggi's death in particular being remembered? This is what he had to say.
Washington Post, for example, did a big piece because Jamal Khashoggi was a columnist for the Washington Post. He was very much a part of the Washington scene politically and socially. There's a lot of attention, for example, in Turkey because Turkey, the murder happened on their soil at the Saudi consulate, but also Turkey is in a bit of a maneuvering, let's say, vis-a-vis the Saudi monarchy, including Mohammed bin Salman. But I think for much of the Arab world, and of course for Saudi Arabia, this is an affair that they don't really want to dwell on.
Don't really want to dwell on. Well, we had a partial mea culpa from Mohammed bin Salman, the Saudi crown prince, blamed by many for being responsible for the killing. He said, I was aware of the killing, but can't be directly linked to it. But in terms of Europe, many European countries refusing to stop arms sales.
All right, thanks for that, Alex and our team in theCUBE. And here in the studio to look at this with us is Hannah Neumann, a German MEP with the Greens EFA Group, who chairs the European Parliament delegation for relations with the Arab Peninsula. And we also have Caroline Voden, a British MEP with the Renew Group, and still with us, Darren McCaffrey, our political editor. I'll start with you, Hannah, because you were reacting when we were talking about Germany there, having extended that suspension of arms sales. What was your reaction? Why were you kind of shaking your head there?
I mean, we've seen a very strong reaction from the European Parliament after the death of Khashoggi that basically decided there should be an arms export ban from all EU member states. The problem is if you have agreed on that ban, you mentioned Germany, but we have a bit of a difficult situation because most of arms projects are actually done in consortia. So for example, the UK is still exporting the Eurofighter to Saudi Arabia. 1/3 of the Eurofighter is German parts.
Right.
And although Germany itself doesn't still sell arms to Saudi Arabia, they sell the parts to the UK, who then sells it to Saudi Arabia. And we see that in many cases also in cooperation projects with France. So also there's a German ban. It doesn't mean that not a lot of German parts are still going to weapons that are going to Saudi Arabia.
All right, so while Germany has that actual ban, the UK, well, it does not. And there is no motivation? What is the perspective from the UK on this?
I think we have a government in the UK that seems quite keen to continue selling arms to Saudi.
Should they be stopping?
I absolutely think they should stop. And I think this argument that thousands of engineering jobs are involved it's an argument. There are people involved in that. You know, people's jobs are involved. But, you know, let's get them engineering something else. Let's do something really positive with those jobs. Let's have them engineering renewable energy, infrastructure and equipment, for example, because then you have a double win. Because that way, if we increase our renewable energy, we can reduce our dependence on Saudi for oil. And doesn't that mean that you know, it's a win-win situation?
But, you know, when we're trying to balance trade and human rights, calling for more human rights, it's easier said than done, obviously. And the EU has been questioned before as to, oh, you're only going this far when you should be going more. But it's hard to do. It's hard to do, isn't it?
Let me do two things. I mean, first of all, Khashoggi's death was a heinous crime. The people who, and that may well involve the Saudi Crown Prince, should be held responsible for it. Britain is banned, or has banned itself from selling weapons when it comes to the war in Yemen, to Saudi Arabia. And let's get this in a sense perspective. Khashoggi's death was horrendous. It's one man. Hundreds, thousands are dying every month in Yemen in a war that's essentially a proxy war between Saudi Arabia and Iran. So let's not lose perspective that somehow we're all calling for arms to Saudi Arabia to be banned because one person has died when thousands of others are dying. But all I would suggest is the British government's position on this, and indeed many other European governments, is not just simply based on trade and jobs. Their argument is the continual, constant argument, which does hold some weight. At the end of the day, they are diplomats and they have to deal with this. They say it is better to maintain a relationship with a country like Saudi Arabia and to try and
isolate it.
But
its worst
not,
successes.
I mean, it's not the selling arms things that maintains relationships. We could, for example, build a relationship on working towards renewable energy and energy transformation, which is something that Saudi Arabia is trying as hard as we to manage. That is something we could build a relationship
But you also know that if the UK didn't do it, or the United States didn't do it, China would sell weapons to Saudi Arabia.
That's just not
we have
true.
to lead by example.
And it's not true. It's not that we could just easily substitute the high quality and very fancy weaponry that European Union somehow produces.
Turkey's doing it right now. Turkey's switching suppliers to Russia.
OK, but it's not just about Khashoggi, is it? Since the Crown Prince was named, there's been a huge crackdown on human rights, a human rights crackdown on women activists, on journalists, on bloggers, on writers, on lawyers. There are 30 journalists and bloggers in prison at the moment in Saudi Arabia. You know, it has to improve its human rights record. And the European Parliament passed a motion in March this year to have an EU-wide sanctions regime. And the member states...
But the problem is when you go down that route, where does it end? Because there are dozens...
But that doesn't mean that we can't do anything.
So you just banned to literally everywhere. I mean, where does it end? Where does it stop?
But we have a clear definition.
Egypt, Libya...
Yeah, Egypt is a problem as well. Libya is a problem as well.
What about the United States of America?
Not a problem.
Has it got a human rights record that you're proud of?
It's not. I'm not proud of the human rights record, but for sure it's not a crisis region at the moment, I would say. So we have a pretty clear definition of where we export and where we
we've run out of time for this discussion, but it certainly has been a very emotional one. OK, but let's now move on to our raw moment before we go. Now, he's already accomplished what you might call mission impossible, going from playing the Ukrainian president on TV to becoming president of Ukraine. But now Vladimir Zelensky appears to have a budding bromance with an American film star. Let's take a look.
Pleasure, pleasure for me. Pleasure.
You're good looking. Like in movie. It pays the rent. Yes.
Well, why not a comedian, former comedian with Tom Cruise?
I have to say this, I don't mean to be rude here. I've never met either Tom Cruise or President Zelensky. But what I do know about Tom Cruise is apparently he's very small, but President Zelensky is even smaller than Tom Cruise. So I don't know what height President Zelensky is, but he's clearly not a tall man.
Either way, I'm happy that you're making these lookism jokes at each other on men's as well now.
Oh, well, yes. There you go. There you go. OK, thank you for joining us tonight on Raw Politics. Do join us again tomorrow, same time, same place. And you can find us on social media, #RawPolitics.